My name is Whitney Parker. I'm 42. The morning my brother stood at my husband's memorial service and thanked everyone for supporting the future owner of Parker Industrial Solutions. I was sitting in the second row holding a leather folder that made his announcement impossible. Inside that folder were corporate board minutes dated March 14, 2008. Kevin just didn't know it yet. The memorial service was held at St. Matthew's Community Church in Boise, Idaho. There were 187 people in attendance. I counted. My husband, Daniel Parker, had built Parker Industrial Solutions from a two-man welding operation into a regional manufacturing company generating just over $4 million annually. He died suddenly at 46. Massive heart attack. No warning. No second chance. 3 weeks later, I sat in the front row while my family decided what should happen next. Not officially. Not in a boardroom. Not through attorneys, at casseroles, at prayer circles, at kitchen tables. That's where family plans begin, especially the dangerous ones. I noticed Kevin standing near the entrance before the service started. He wasn't greeting mourners. He wasn't comforting employees. He was talking business. I watched him speak to 3 department managers before the pastor even stepped to the podium. I counted. 3 conversations, 4 handshakes, 1 folder. The folder bothered me. Because Daniel's managers shouldn't have been discussing company matters at a memorial service. Not unless someone wanted them to. Kevin saw me looking. He smiled. The same smile he had worn since childhood whenever he thought he'd already won something. I knew that smile. I had spent 36 years watching it. My brother Kevin Parker was 44, 2 years older than me, 2 years louder, 2 years more entitled. Our mother, Susan Parker, always said Kevin was a natural leader. What she meant was Kevin enjoyed being the center of attention. The distinction mattered, at least to me, maybe not to her. Growing up, Kevin was the child people adjusted around. Family dinners happened when Kevin arrived. Vacation destinations changed when Kevin complained. Rules bent. Expectations shifted. Consequences disappeared. I learned something different. I learned how to prepare, how to document, how to keep records. How to survive people who expected the world to rearrange itself for them. Daniel used to joke that I could probably produce a receipt for lunch from 10 years ago. He wasn't entirely wrong. The receipt would be filed, labeled, dated, probably scanned too. That habit saved me more than once. It would save me again. The church filled slowly. Employees sat together near the left side. Family occupied the front rows. Customers arrived carrying flowers. Former business partners came in pairs. Daniel had been respected, not because he demanded respect, because he earned it. There's a difference. Kevin didn't understand that difference. He thought authority came from speaking first. Daniel understood authority came from being trusted last. Around 11:27, Kevin stood. The service wasn't over. The pastor hadn't invited anyone forward. Kevin simply stood. I checked my watch. 11:27 exactly. I remember because I wrote it down later. People turned toward him automatically. That happened often. Kevin expected attention. Most people eventually gave it to him. He cleared his throat. Then he started talking. Not about Daniel, not really. He spoke about legacy, opportunity, responsibility, the future. The words sounded rehearsed, like something practiced in front of a mirror. Then he said it. The company will remain in family hands. A few people nodded. I stayed still. The employees can relax knowing I'll continue what Daniel started. There it was, the announcement. No board vote, no legal authority, no ownership transfer, just confidence. Confidence often sounds convincing to people who don't know the facts. Several employees looked relieved. That hurt more than I expected, because they thought uncertainty was over. It wasn't. It was just beginning. I looked at my hands. Neither one moved. That took effort. A lot of effort. The easier choice would have been standing up, correcting him, telling everyone he had no authority whatsoever. Instead, I stayed silent. The silence cost me. People started congratulating him afterward. I heard it. I heard every word. Daniel would have wanted that. You'll do great. Good to know the business is secure. Kevin accepted every compliment. Not once did he correct anyone, not once. After the service ended, I counted 17 separate conversations where Kevin discussed company matters. 17. I wrote them down that evening. Not because I planned revenge, because records matter, they always matter. The first warning sign had appeared almost 2 years earlier. Most betrayals don't begin dramatically. They begin quietly. So quietly that later you wonder how you missed them. In 2024, Daniel and I hosted Thanksgiving. 43 guests. 3 folding tables. 2 turkeys, 1 broken dishwasher. I remember all of it. Around 9:30 that night, I walked into Daniel's office looking for extra serving trays. Kevin was already there. He had opened a filing cabinet. When he saw me, he closed it immediately, too quickly. People who belong somewhere don't move like that. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking for a phone charger." He smiled, the same smile. I looked at the filing cabinet, then at him, then back at the cabinet. Neither of us spoke for about 7 seconds. I counted. Finally, he laughed too loudly, then he walked away. Daniel found me standing there afterward. I told him what happened. He frowned. Not because he thought Kevin was stealing, because he didn't like dishonesty. That bothered him more than mistakes ever did. 3 days later, he changed the locks on that office. He never explained why. At the time, I didn't think much about it. After all, families overlook strange behavior. That's one reason manipulation works. People explain away what they should examine. They call it loyalty. Sometimes it's just avoidance. Daniel and Kevin had always maintained a complicated relationship. Kevin admired Daniel's success. He also resented it. Those two emotions often occupied the same room. Daniel founded the company. Kevin joined 7 years later, not as a partner, as a sales manager. That distinction mattered too. Daniel owned the company. Kevin worked for it. Yet over time, Kevin started describing himself differently. Not employee, not manager, not even executive. He liked the phrase essential to operations. I heard him use it dozens of times, maybe hundreds. The more successful the company became, the more Kevin blurred the line between contribution and ownership. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. Daniel noticed everything. He simply didn't react quickly. One night in February 2025, he sat at our kitchen table reviewing year-end financial reports. I remember because there were 12 folders spread across the table. 12, I counted. He looked tired, more tired than usual. "Kevin's been asking strange questions," he said. "What kind?" "Ownership questions." I set down my coffee. Daniel tapped one folder, then another, a habit when he was thinking. "He keeps asking what happens if I retire." I waited. "He keeps asking what happens if something happens to me." The room felt colder, not dangerous, just uncomfortable, like hearing a sentence you don't want to remember later. "What did you tell him?" "The truth." Daniel smiled slightly. "That paperwork exists for a reason." At the time, neither of us knew how important that sentence would become, because paperwork did exist, a lot of it, and somewhere inside those records was something Kevin had never seen. Something Daniel never mentioned publicly. Something created years before anyone imagined needing it. A document waiting quietly in the background, the kind that changes everything. But I wouldn't discover it until much later. And by then, Kevin's plan would already be moving. Before we continue, I'm curious. Have you ever had a family member make decisions about something that wasn't actually theirs to decide? The hardest betrayals often start with someone acting entitled to what they've never earned. That question stayed with me as I drove home from the memorial service. Because by then, Kevin wasn't just talking about ownership. He was behaving like ownership had already been transferred. And the strangest part, someone else in the family was helping him do it. Someone who should have known better. Someone who had been there the entire time. My mother, Susan Parker, the enforcer. Though I didn't understand her role yet, not completely, that realization would arrive 9 days later, along with a voicemail I was never supposed to hear, and after listening to it twice, I understood exactly why Kevin had sounded so confident at the memorial service. The question was no longer what he planned to do. The question was whether I was already too late to stop him. 9 days after Daniel's memorial service, I was sitting alone in his office at Parker Industrial Solutions when my phone rang. It was 6:42 p.m. I remember because the sun was still hitting the west-facing windows. The office felt wrong without him. Too quiet, too organized. Daniel had always been tidy, but he carried a certain energy into a room. When he disappeared, the room noticed. The caller ID showed my mother's name. Susan Parker. I almost didn't answer. Not because I was angry, because every conversation since the funeral had exhausted me. I answered anyway. "Hello." Nothing, no response, just silence, then a click. The call disconnected. I looked at the screen. 4 seconds later, a voicemail notification appeared. First, I assumed she'd pocket-dialed me. Then I pressed play and heard Kevin's voice. The voicemail lasted 2 minutes and 11 seconds. I listened to it 3 times. The first time, I didn't believe what I was hearing. The second time, I took notes. The third time, I realized they never intended for me to hear it. Kevin sounded irritated, not angry, Confident people rarely sound angry. They sound inconvenienced. "Mom, you need to stop worrying about Whitney." A pause, then my mother's voice. Quiet, nervous. What if Daniel left something? I froze. Kevin laughed, actually laughed. The attorneys already would have told us. Us, not her, us. Another pause, then Kevin again. The board needs leadership. The employees need certainty. The clients need stability. And honestly, she doesn't know enough to run it anyway. I stared at Daniel's desk. I wrote down every sentence, word for word. There were 17 separate statements in that voicemail. I counted. The final one bothered me most. Kevin said, "Once the transfer is finished, none of this will matter." Transfer, not succession, not management. Transfer, specific words matter, especially when someone accidentally tells the truth. The voicemail ended. I sat there for 11 minutes. I counted. Then I called Daniel's attorney. His name was Richard Whittaker, 68 years old, founding partner of Whittaker and Hensley Attorneys at Law. Daniel trusted him for 20 years. I trusted Daniel's judgment. Richard answered on the second ring. "Whitney?" I asked him one question. "Has anything been transferred?" Silence, 5 seconds, maybe 6. Then he said, "I think you should come in tomorrow morning." That wasn't an answer, which meant it probably was. The next day I arrived at his office at 8:03 a.m. Richard already had files waiting, 3 stacks, 1 legal pad, 2 cups of coffee, one concern he was trying not to show. I knew because his left hand kept tapping the desk. Daniel used to do the same thing. Richard listened to the voicemail, twice. Then he leaned back. "Your brother's moving faster than I expected." My stomach tightened. What exactly is he trying to do? Richard opened a folder, then another, then another. Documents covered the conference table. Corporate records, shareholder agreements, operating documents, board resolutions. I counted 27 separate documents. The company was privately owned. Daniel owned 82%. The remaining 18% belonged to 3 early investors who had never sold their interests. Not Kevin, never Kevin. Richard adjusted his glasses. Legally, Kevin owns nothing. The relief lasted about 3 seconds, then Richard continued. But legally and practically are 2 different things. I understood immediately. Authority isn't always stolen on paper. Sometimes it's stolen through assumptions, through appearances, through people deciding something is true before verifying it. The memorial service suddenly made sense. The conversations, the handshakes, the confidence. Kevin wasn't claiming ownership. He was creating ownership in people's minds, one conversation at a time, one assumption at a time. Richard nodded, exactly. Then he asked me a question. "Did Daniel ever mention the archive room?" I frowned. "What archive room?" That got his attention. Apparently Daniel never told me. Richard stood. Walked to a filing cabinet, unlocked it, removed a key, small brass key. Number 14 stamped on the side, then he slid it across the table. This belonged to Daniel. I stared at it. The key looked ordinary. Most important things do. Richard smiled slightly. "There's a records room at the original facility. Everything since the company's founding. Every contract, every board meeting, every ownership document, every amendment, every revision, every recording, stored, cataloged, preserved, exactly the way Daniel liked things." Suddenly I missed him so much I couldn't breathe properly, because that sounded exactly like him. Of course he archived everything. Of course he documented everything. Of course he planned ahead. The question was why, and what exactly he thought might happen. 2 hours later, I drove to the original manufacturing building. The company's first location, a modest warehouse on the outskirts of Boise. Most operations had moved years ago. Building remained mostly storage. A maintenance supervisor named Carl met me there. Carl Jensen, 61, employee number 6. He'd worked alongside Daniel since the beginning. When he saw me holding the key, something changed in his expression. Not surprise, recognition, like he'd been waiting. Without a word, Carl led me down a hallway, past old offices, past storage rooms, past locked doors. At the end sat a steel door. No sign, no label, just a lock. I inserted key 14. Door opened. The room wasn't large, maybe 12 by 15 feet. Shelves lined every wall, boxes, binders, audio recordings, labeled containers, decades of history, everything dated, everything organized, everything exactly where Daniel wanted it. I felt tears threaten for the first time since the funeral, not because of grief alone, because the room felt like Daniel, his habits, his discipline, his way of preparing for futures nobody else considered. Carl stood quietly beside me. Then he said something strange. "He told me you'd come eventually." I turned. "What?" Carl nodded toward the shelves. "Not when. Eventually. A chill moved through me. What exactly did he say? Carl thought for a moment, then answered. He said if you ever needed this room, it would mean someone forgot who actually built the company. Neither of us spoke afterward. We didn't need to. I spent 6 hours reviewing records. 6 hours and 19 minutes, not that I was counting. Actually, I was. By late afternoon, I had discovered something important. Not the document, not yet, something else. A pattern, a contradiction. Kevin had been requesting copies of ownership-related documents for nearly 18 months, repeatedly. The requests appeared in emails, meeting notes, administrative logs. Every request was denied. Politely. Consistently. The more he asked, the more interested I became. Why was he preparing so far in advance? Because this wasn't grief. This wasn't opportunity. This was strategy, and strategy leaves evidence. Around 4:47 p.m., I found a box labeled Board Records 2008. Inside sat dozens of folders, minutes, votes, resolutions, founding agreements. Then I found a sealed envelope, my name written on the front, not Whitney Parker, just Whitney, Daniel's handwriting. My hands actually shook. For the first time since all this began, I opened it carefully. Inside was a single note, 8 lines. 83 words. I still remember every one. The final sentence changed everything. If you're reading this, check March 14, 2008. That date again. The same date mentioned on the corporate board minutes in my folder. The same date Kevin had never asked about. The same date nobody seemed interested in, except Daniel. And suddenly I drove home carrying copies of those records. The sky was already dark. The clock was moving. Because while I was discovering old documents, Kevin was moving forward. Faster. The following morning I learned he had scheduled an executive leadership meeting. Friday, 9:00 a.m., 3 days away. Mandatory attendance. Department heads only. No invitation for me. That was when the slow timeline and the fast timeline collided. Years of preparation. 3 days to act. And somewhere inside those March 14, 2008 records was the reason Daniel had left me that note. Before we continue, I want to ask something. Have you ever stayed silent because speaking too soon would have ruined everything you were working toward? Sometimes silence feels like surrender. Sometimes it's the only reason the truth survives long enough to matter. I spent that night reviewing records until 1:13 a.m. And at exactly 12:41, buried inside a stack of board minutes, I found the document. The one Kevin never knew existed. The one Daniel had protected for 18 years. The one capable of ending my brother's entire plan without a single argument. When I finished reading it, I understood why Daniel had never worried. I also understood why Kevin would panic if he ever saw it. The leadership meeting was now less than 72 hours away, and for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't wondering what Kevin planned to do. I was wondering how he'd react when the room discovered he had already lost. At 8:14 a.m. on Friday morning, I parked across the street from Parker Industrial Solutions and watched employees arrive. The leadership meeting started at 9:00, 46 minutes away. The June air was already warm. My coffee had gone cold. I never drank it. I sat there holding a leather binder that weighed less than 3 pounds and carried 18 years of history. Funny how power works. People imagine it looks dramatic. It usually looks like paperwork. At 8:21, Richard Whittaker climbed into the passenger seat. At 8:27, Carl Jensen arrived in his truck. At 8:34, another vehicle pulled into the parking lot. A silver sedan. I recognized the driver immediately. Harold Mercer. Employee number 3, original board member. One of the 3 minority shareholders. 72 years old. Semi-retired. Still respected by everyone, especially Kevin. That mattered, because Harold wasn't there by accident. Neither was Carl. Neither was Richard. The witness had arrived, and Kevin had no idea. The document I found at 12:41 a.m. 3 nights earlier wasn't a will. It wasn't a trust. It wasn't even a shareholder agreement. It was something far worse for Kevin. A unanimous board resolution dated March 14, 2008, signed by every founding shareholder, notarized, recorded, accompanied by audio transcripts. The resolution created an automatic succession structure, not management, ownership authority, and buried in paragraph 7 was a provision nobody outside the founders knew existed. If Daniel Parker died unexpectedly, temporary controlling authority automatically transferred to a designated successor approved by the board. The successor's name could only be changed through another unanimous board vote. There had never been another vote. Not once. 18 years. No amendments, no revisions, no replacements. The successor listed in the document was Whitney Parker. Me. Daniel had arranged it before we were even married. Back when I was helping him balance payroll spreadsheets at a folding table. Back when the company barely survived month to month. Back when nobody imagined millions of dollars would ever be involved. He trusted me before anyone else did. Maybe even before I trusted myself. The audio recording from that board meeting lasted 47 minutes. I listened to every second. Near the end, Harold asked Daniel why he was choosing me. Daniel's answer was 21 words. I counted. Because Whitney keeps records when nobody else thinks records matter. I cried when I heard it, not loudly, just quietly. Alone, at 1:18 in the morning, at 8:52 a.m. we entered the building. The executive conference room sat on the second floor. Large glass walls, long walnut table, 14 leather chairs, company logo mounted behind the head seat. I could already hear voices. Kevin was speaking. Of course he was. The door remained partially open. As Richard approached, we heard Kevin clearly. Continuity is important right now. Several managers nodded. The family wants stability. Family, interesting choice of words, because nobody had voted, nobody had authorized him, nobody had even asked me. Yet somehow he was speaking as if ownership belonged to him. I counted 11 people already seated, department heads, operations, finance, sales, manufacturing, human resources, people Daniel trusted. People trying to protect their jobs. Kevin stood at the front. My mother sat beside him. Susan looked nervous, very nervous. The confidence she'd shown at the funeral was gone. That caught my attention, because nervous people know something, confident people don't. The room fell silent when I entered, not dramatic silence, confused silence. The kind people make when expectations suddenly stop matching reality. Kevin recovered first. Naturally, he smiled. That smile again. I didn't realize this meeting included spouses. Several people laughed, not many, just enough. I counted 4. Kevin looked pleased. Then Richard Whittaker walked in behind me. The laughter stopped. Then Carl entered, then Harold. And suddenly Kevin wasn't smiling quite as much. He looked from face to face, trying to understand, trying to calculate, trying to catch up. The problem was simple. The meeting had started without all the facts, and facts were finally arriving. This was the confrontation, exactly where it belonged, a corporate boardroom, neutral ground, witnesses present, records available, no speeches required, only documentation. Kevin crossed his arms. What exactly is this? There it was, the demand, the assumption, the confidence, beat 1, beat 2, exactly as predictable as Daniel would have expected. I placed the binder on the table, nothing more, no accusations, no anger, no performance. Then I opened it. Page 1. March 14, 2008. Board Resolution 814A signed copies. Notary seal, supporting exhibits, audio transcript certification. I slid the document across the table. Please read paragraph 7. That was all I said, 12 words. The room became very quiet. Kevin frowned, then started reading. Halfway through the paragraph, he stopped, started again, then read it a third time. I counted 3 readings, the same way I had. Across the table, Harold Mercer removed his glasses, then spoke for the first time. I remember that vote. Nobody interrupted, nobody could, because Harold had been there, actually there, not guessing, not speculating, present, witness. Truth has a different weight when it comes from someone who watched it happen. Harold continued. Daniel wanted continuity. He believed ownership and leadership weren't the same thing. Kevin looked up sharply. This doesn't transfer ownership. Correct, Richard said. It transfers controlling authority. Kevin turned toward him, fast, too fast. People reveal themselves in moments like that. Control disappears. Instinct takes over. For about 3 seconds, I saw something real. Fear, not anger, not arrogance. Fear, a flash of recognition. The sudden realization that a plan built over months had already collapsed years before it began. Then the expression vanished. Armor returned. But I saw it. Everyone saw it. 3 seconds. Maybe 4, enough. Kevin tried another approach. What does this actually mean? Richard answered calmly. It means Whitney controls operational authority. It means major decisions require her approval. It means today's meeting has no legal standing. Silence. I counted 7 seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Kevin stared at the table. My mother stared at Kevin. The managers stared at the documents. Reality was reorganizing itself. Slowly, publicly, irreversibly. Then Harold reached into his briefcase, something nobody expected, including me, another document, original meeting notes. March 14, 2008, signed, archived, verified. I brought these just in case. Witnesses matter, especially the prepared ones. Kevin's voice sounded different now, smaller. Daniel never told me. Harold answered immediately. I think that's because Daniel already knew. The room understood exactly what he meant. Daniel knew Kevin. Daniel knew entitlement. Daniel knew assumptions, and 18 years earlier he'd prepared accordingly. No revenge, no punishment, just preparation. Nobody celebrated, that's the part people misunderstand. There wasn't applause, there wasn't humiliation, there wasn't victory, only facts, and facts don't cheer. They simply remain. I closed the binder, then stood. My final sentence was exactly 9 words. I counted later. The records haven't changed, even if assumptions did. Then I left. No speech, no lecture. No waiting for responses, just documentation. The document had spoken. I didn't need to. The fallout began before lunch. I learned most of it secondhand. The way people always learn family truths. One phone call at a time. One conversation at a time. One leak at a time. Kevin spent nearly 3 hours calling managers, explaining, clarifying, reframing. None of it worked, because explanations struggle against records, especially written ones. By evening, word had spread through the company. Not gossip, information. Employees discovered Daniel had already planned succession. Customers heard the leadership structure remained intact. Vendors relaxed. The uncertainty disappeared. Not because I fought Kevin, because Daniel had prepared. The community heard about it too. Boise isn't a small town, but business circles are. People talk, attorneys talk, bankers talk. Board members definitely talk. By Monday, everyone knew one thing. Kevin had tried to step into a role that was never his. Nobody said it cruelly. Nobody needed to. Facts did the work. The social consequences landed quietly. The way real consequences usually do. Invitations changed. Conversations changed. Assumptions changed. The story Kevin told about himself stopped matching the record. That's a difficult thing to recover from. 3 days later, another piece of information reached me. One I never expected, one involving my mother, Susan Parker, the enforcer, the person who stayed silent, the person who knew more than she admitted. Carl called me at 4:16 p.m. His voice sounded strange. Whitney, what? A pause, then I think you need to hear something. What? Another pause, longer this time, then Carl said, your mother came to the archive room. I sat up immediately. Why? Carl's answer changed everything. Because apparently Susan hadn't come looking for records. She came looking for one specific document. A document she'd already seen once before, years ago. A document proving she knew exactly what would happen if Daniel died. Which meant her silence wasn't confusion. It was a choice. And when I learned what document she was searching for, I finally understood why she'd looked so nervous in that boardroom. Because she hadn't been afraid of Kevin failing. She'd been afraid of a secret she'd hidden for 18 years becoming public. Carl called me at 4:16 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was reviewing vendor contracts in Daniel's old office. The same office Kevin had once searched for documents during Thanksgiving. The same office Daniel had quietly rekeyed afterward. The same office where everything suddenly made more sense. Whitney, Carl said. His voice sounded careful, not nervous, not excited, careful. People become careful when they're carrying information they aren't sure belongs to them. What happened? I asked. Carl exhaled. Then he said, your mother came looking for something. I leaned back in my chair. The clock on the wall read 4:17. I remember because I stared at it while he spoke. What was she looking for? There was a pause, then the succession file. I didn't answer immediately because the words landed strangely, not surprising, worse, confirming. Carl continued. She knew exactly where it was. That sentence stayed with me, not because of what it said, because of what it meant. People don't search for specific documents they know nothing about. They search for documents they've seen before. I felt cold, despite it being 82 degrees outside. When did she see it? Carl answered quietly. 2008. The room became very still. 18 years. 18 years of knowing. 18 years of silence. 18 years of pretending she didn't understand what Daniel had arranged. And when Kevin started making plans after the funeral, she never stopped him because stopping him would have required telling the truth. 3 days later, I received confirmation. Not from Carl, not from Richard, from my mother herself. A handwritten letter, 7 pages, postmarked June 18. The envelope arrived at 10:13 a.m. I stared at it for nearly 15 minutes before opening it. I counted. The handwriting looked older than I remembered. Smaller, less certain. People's handwriting changes when confidence leaves them. The first page contained no excuses. That surprised me. Most apologies arrived disguised as explanations. This one didn't. Susan wrote, "I knew about the succession agreement." The sentence sat alone, no defense, no justification, just truth. I kept reading, page after page. And for the first time in my life, my mother sounded honest. Not kind, not redeemed, honest. She admitted attending the March 14, 2008 dinner where Daniel informed a few family members about the board resolution. She admitted hearing him explain why he chose me. She admitted believing Kevin would eventually accept it. Then came the sentence that hurt most. I knew he never accepted it. Not because she discovered it later, because she'd known for years. She'd watched it happen, watched the resentment, watched the entitlement, watched the assumptions, and said nothing, not once. Not when it mattered. The letter became harder to read after that. My mother described a conversation she'd had with Daniel in 2022, 2 years before his death. According to her, Daniel asked a question, just one, a simple one. If something happens to me, will you support Whitney? My mother's answer had been yes. She admitted lying, not intentionally. At least that's what she claimed. She believed she would support me, until the moment arrived. Then fear took over. Fear of conflict. Fear of choosing sides. Fear of losing Kevin. The truth was simpler. Peace mattered more to her than honesty. And peace built on dishonesty never lasts. Eventually someone pays, usually the person who remained silent. I finished the letter at 11:02 a.m. Then I placed it inside a folder, labeled it, dated it, stored it. Exactly the way Daniel would have. I never responded. Not immediately. Some letters don't require answers. They require acknowledgement. That's different. The consequences unfolded slowly over the following months. Not dramatically, not publicly, just realistically. The way real life tends to operate. Kevin resigned 6 months later. Officially, he said he wanted new opportunities. Unofficially, nobody believed him. His authority inside the company had changed permanently. Not because I removed him, because trust had changed. Trust is difficult to rebuild once people discover you were claiming authority you didn't possess. Eventually joined a regional competitor. The position paid less. The title sounded bigger. That felt very Kevin. Image first, reality second. The architect lost what mattered most to him, not money, narrative. The story he'd been telling about himself stopped working. My mother's consequence looked different. Nobody publicly criticized her. Nobody confronted her. Nobody embarrassed her. Instead, she experienced something quieter. Distance. The kind that develops when truth arrives too late. Birthdays became shorter. Phone calls became less frequent. Holiday visits became optional. We weren't enemies. That would have been easier. We simply weren't what we'd once pretended to be. Relationships sometimes survive betrayal, but they rarely return unchanged. The beneficiary suffered a consequence too, though not the one he'd expected. Kevin sent me an email 11 months later. Subject line, question, 1 word, nothing more. The email contained 5 sentences, 4 were about him. 1 was about me. I counted. That seemed appropriate. He wrote about job offers, income changes, professional frustrations, then asked whether I would consider supporting his recommendation for a board position elsewhere, not apologizing, not acknowledging, requesting. The same pattern, just packaged differently. I responded with a single sentence, 21 words, no anger, no lecture, no hostility. Professional recommendations require professional trust, and rebuilding trust takes longer than writing an email. He never replied. Neither did I. 1 year later, another message arrived. This one mattered more, far more. It came at 9:14 a.m., a voicemail from my father, Frank Parker, the true enforcer. The person who spent decades avoiding difficult conversations. The person who convinced himself neutrality was virtue. The voicemail lasted 1 minute and 43 seconds. Played it 3 times, then saved it. His voice sounded thinner than I remembered, older, tired. He said, I should have spoken sooner. I knew Kevin believed the company was his. I knew your mother was afraid of confronting him. I knew Daniel trusted you. Every time I stayed quiet, I told myself I was keeping the family together. I wasn't. I was protecting myself from uncomfortable conversations. You deserved better than that. Then silence, 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then, I don't expect a response. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere besides my head. The voicemail ended. I sat there for a long time afterward, not crying, not smiling, just listening. Truth arrives differently when someone finally stops defending themselves. I never responded, not because I rejected it, because some truths deserve space before they receive answers. Today, Parker Industrial Solutions remains healthy. The company employs 123 people. Revenue continues growing. The leadership structure Daniel built still exists. Not because of me, because of preparation, because records matter, because trust matters, because documentation survives people. As for my family, the relationships remain complicated, which is another way of saying they're real. My mother and I speak occasionally. My father and I exchange messages every few weeks. Kevin and I rarely communicate. When we do, it's brief. Professional, careful. There are no dramatic reconciliations, no holiday movie endings, no miraculous healing, just boundaries. And honesty, more honesty than we had before. Before I finish, I'd like to ask something. If you had to choose one word to describe what matters most in a family, trust, loyalty, honesty, respect, or accountability, which would you choose? Write that one word in the comments. And if you've ever watched a family relationship change because someone finally told the truth, I'd be interested to know where you're from. Sometimes seeing how many people understand that experience makes it feel a little less lonely. Last week, I sat on the back porch of my house just outside Boise as the sun disappeared behind the trees. A light wind moved through the yard. The kind Daniel always liked. In my hands was the original March 14, 2008 board resolution. The paper had begun to yellow slightly around the edges. I read the signatures one more time. Then I looked at the line nomming the successor. Not with triumph, not with sadness. Something quieter than either. Something earned. The porch light clicked on above me as the sky darkened, and for a few moments I sat there holding that document, listening to the evening settle around the house Daniel built, feeling the weight of everything that had been lost and everything that had been protected.